one of our TESS weekly seminars. It's great to have you all here. TESS, of course, is our Center for Tropical, Environmental, and Sustainability Science, and it's one of our main forums for terrestrial research at JCU, aquatic research too. It's a real pleasure to introduce Noel Preece. Noel got his PhD at Charles Darwin University, and he's engaged in so many different things. I honestly don't think I can remember half of them, but he's
I have the same problem.
One of the directors of NRM Terrain. I mean, he's engaged in so many carbon issues and things around the place. Noel and his wife, Dr. Penny Van Oosterzee, have a lovely property up on the tablelands where they're doing a lot of carbon farming. And I guess you probably won't be talking about that today, but anyway, that's a wonderful project they have going up there. Without further ado, though, we'll turn things over to Noel, and thank you very much for coming down to talk to us.
Thank you. All right, today I'm talking about the spectacled flying fox again. It happens to be Bat Week, of all things. So we're all saved because the governments are going to give us lots of money and resources to be able to save all the species of bats that are in danger, which is such a blessing. I'd like to first just acknowledge my colleagues and collaborators and friends and others who are working on spectacled flying foxes and other flying foxes around Australia and the world. There's been a lot of discussion about this since I've been involved with this particular species for the last 5 years. Some of them listed there. I acknowledge that we're on Gimoi country, but the spectacled flying fox covers a very large area of some 30 different nations and tribal groups, indigenous nations and tribal groups across Cape York and the Wet Tropics. So as you can see, so it's quite a lot of people. I'd like to start the story about the situation, and some of you will be aware of this, but the spectacled flying fox has seen a serious decline over the last 20 or so years. We've known about it, however, for more than 30 years. The monitoring that was put up under the National Flying Fox Monitoring Program was conducted by CSIRO, and they had really good evidence to show that the population had declined by about 75%, which is pretty dramatic. You know, it's not a trivial thing that's gone on from over 300,000 to about 78,000. Interestingly also, and another little factoid is that most of the roosts fall outside World Heritage areas and protected areas and conservation areas. So the roosts actually occur in agricultural lands, both on the tablelands and on the coast and up on Cape York. Most of those roosts are not legally protected. Today I'll be covering just a few key topics. I'm not going to go through the whole story of spectacled flying foxes. There's far too much to talk about. But I wanted to raise some of the things that really came out of the systematic review I've just had published in Wildlife Letters. And some of the things here were not addressed in previous studies and weren't addressed in the original recovery plan, which was published in 2010. Things like global warming, you know, there might be some impacts from global warming. It was a possible, factor in causing them problems. Invasives like invasive ants, they just didn't reckon. There's nothing on the horizon, nothing on the radar for all of that time. Habitat destruction, that was identified, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Diet and the loss of food resources, sort of hinted at the time, but not much done. And I'd also like to cover citizen science as a complement to what we call real science, because citizen science can be of huge benefit to species like this. And then I'll cover just a couple of little things about science fiction and what we can do. In Australia, we have 5 species of flying fox, 4 of them on the mainland. That's the spectacled, of course, that's confined to the Wet Tropics and Cape York. The little red, sorry, this one here, that doesn't come out well. The little red is the next one along. That's fairly widespread. It's in millions of numbers, and they cover a very, very large region of eastern and northern Australia. They move in hundreds of thousands flocks, pollinating trees, mostly eucalypts and melaleuca, and they move according to the resources. They move, if there's a mass flowering event, that's where they move to. And that's why you see them sometimes and sometimes don't. Then there's the black flying fox, which is mostly eastern and northern Australia. There are some huge colonies up on the mangroves in east of Darwin that I've seen. Just huge numbers, like hundreds of thousands. In the southeast, we have this grey-headed flying fox, which is a vulnerable species. And then on Christmas Island, we have the Christmas Island flying fox, which is the Christmas Island in the Indian Ocean, which is now critically endangered, having suffered quite a lot of loss over the last few decades. We have some similar pteropodids in the northern blossom bat, eastern tube-nosed bat, and bareback fruit bat, but they're different in that not only are they smaller, but they don't actually roost in colonies the way that spectacles and the other 4 species do. So they're quite distinctly different in that way. Distinguishing features of the spectacled flying fox, for those who don't know, it's basically the eye patch, you know, the paler yellow-red eye patch around the eyes, and the main, a couple of the other species, like the grey-headed, have golden or reddish manes, and the black sometimes does, but not often. The world distribution of spectacled flying fox is in 2 subspecies, is the northern coast of Papua New Guinea and west into the eastern part of Indonesia, Halmahera and so on. That's a subspecies called chrysalcon, and the conspicillatus is the one to the east of Papua New Guinea and into Australia. There's a bit of interchange, but not much as far as we know, and we have no idea about the status of populations in New Guinea. It's just not studied. There's nothing written on it. In Australia, the spectacled flying fox is confined to the Wet Tropics and Cape York. This is just a map of the roosts that I've managed to document over the last few years. So it's a very restricted range. It's just the coastal fall of the Wet Tropics and some areas in the tablelands, and a few isolated colonies to the west. And then Iron Range, Macklewrath Range up on northern Cape York. And we don't have much information on those populations, but we have some. The spectacled flying fox is a medium-sized flying fox. It weighs up to about 1 kilo for a male and a bit less for a female. It lives to 13 years mostly. Sometimes some species actually can live up to 18 years in the field, very closely related species. They produce only from about 2 to 3 years old before they start producing. They've got a reproductive period of maybe 5 to 8 animals, so 5 to 8 years. And they only produce 1 pup per year, so that's sort of like 5 to 8 animals. The annual mortality has been reported as being 35%. I'm a little bit suspicious of that because that was in a population affected by tick fever, tick paralysis from the paralysis tick. So it's probably a lot lower than that, but there's a bit more work on that. With no disturbance, the population would naturally increase. And this is from Dave Westcott and co.'s work in 2018. Natural increase is about 0.04 per 100 per year. In the presence of disturbance, which is what we always get, it declines, and that's one of the reasons we're seeing this decline over the last 20 years of about minus 0.12 per year. So that's of concern. It's not a population that can suddenly bounce back like a Bradysphylla sissimus or something like that. Now we get on to the gritty bits of the story. I put this up as fantasy because people say, oh, well, we can turn the climate trend around. Does anybody really think we're going to turn it around looking at that graph? And that's not the only graph that shows the change. There's the greenhouse emissions graph just continues to climb in the last 30 or 50 years that we've been aware that there's a greenhouse effect that's caused by us. And so we have to deal with that as fact, this reality. So what can we do about this? So first of all, let's talk about the real elephant in the room. It's I think the major effect that will cause major problems with the spectacled flying fox over the next 10 or 20 years, or maybe sooner. The animals die at 42 degrees. They just die because it's so hot they can't cool down, they can't fan themselves, they can't escape the heat envelopes that we've recognised. I mentioned that we've lost 75% of the population, which took it down to about 78,000 in 2017. Then, after that, in November 2018, we lost 23,000 in one heat event that lasted several days. 23,000, that's about a third of the population that was known at the time. So that's a really serious thing. It's not a trivial thing that, you know, oh, we might get a few hot days and the bats should be able to fly away and, you know, find somewhere else on the tablelands or something. It doesn't work like that. Temperatures at that time reached about 42.9 ambient temperature. Maximum temperature is recorded about 48 degrees. And it was much hotter inside the colony than outside the colony. So it's where they're roosting, which is of great concern. The regional temperature was about 10 degrees above average on the 27th. That's from Bureau-Met. And then city sites were up to, and this is from Camilo Lopez and Susan and the Cadler-Firth work in 2024. City sites were actually, you know, around 8 degrees warmer than what was recorded at Cairns Airport. So that's another concern. And what the 2018 picture looked like was this. The heat envelope or heat pocket blanket came over from the west and just came over the wet tropics and just sort of blanketed down over the area. And there were some serious records broken at that time. You know, 2, 3, 4 degrees above the historic high temperatures. And a lot of that high heat area was right over the top of the known distributions of the spectacled flying fox. That's the wet tropics and the Cape York area. That's where the heat occurred. So we were very lucky it didn't wipe out the whole lot. But having said that, there is some small hope. And I'm trying to talk about a hopeful future, because we hear so much negativity that maybe we can work around this. We can't stop that heat trend. It's going to keep going. But when the Bureau actually did their report on that 2018 event, they had some finer scale detail and could identify that some of the areas were within that heat envelope with the extreme temperatures were more affected and some less affected than others. So that gives me a little bit of hope that maybe we can plan around this and build a heat model, which I'm proposing, to try to, you know, avoid places like this. This is the Gordonvale area where most of the roosts that were seriously affected is located. So why would you, if you know that that's going to be affected by heat events, or you anticipate it might be affected by heat events, why would you try to do much work there? Why not, you know, do work further up, maybe the, you know, Port Douglas area or the Tablelands or somewhere else? And we need to build a heat model to model that. And that's what I'm suggesting in the paper, that a model that actually picks up how the heat events like that work. We need more monitoring sites for sure, but it could actually produce some means of planning for roost management. And roosts are utilised, you know, frequently or occasionally, and the animals do move from one roost to another from time to time. Sometimes they'll occupy the same roost for 6, 7, 8 years. Sometimes they'll just move on, you know, within a week or two. So we need to develop some sort of heat model to anticipating that it is going to get hotter and we're going to have these events where the animals just can't escape. So we need to consider that. Next thing I wanted to cover was diet. There were publications from sort of 2000, the late 90s and the early 2000s, which had documented some of the fruits and leaves and pollen that the spectacled flying fox relies on. But in the most recent publication before mine, they had about 76 or something species that were eaten by or pollinated by spectacled flying foxes. Since then, I've discovered a thesis that actually documented another 30-odd species. And I've also added on a few from Ona and some colleagues' observations. So there's another 120-odd species of native species that are eaten by spectacled flying foxes. But having a look at some of the literature from one of the Malaysian researchers, Shina Aziz, she identified, she did the systematic review of flying foxes the flying fox group, and some of them have a lot more species. They're using a lot more species, including some of the species found in Australia. And this is important because, oh, sorry, I might just mention one of their favourite crops, favourite foods, which is one of the big problems that people face, is that they love our domesticated and cropped fruits because they're all in the one place and they can feast all night without having to fly too far. And they also eat weeds and distribute things like guava and wild tobacco, which is just great because guava's a real great colonizer. It can take over whole landscapes, and wild tobacco not much better. It is a great colonizer, but it also carries the paralysis tick, from what we understand, which can cause the paralysis of particularly young ones. The part of the reason we need to understand this is that I mentioned that there are new, unanticipated factors that are causing problems with spectacled flying foxes and others. One of them is myrtle rust. That wasn't even here when the first plan was written, but it came into the region, into Australia, in about 2010, and it's moved up here since. It's already affected 15 or so rainforest species, and they're at risk of extinction. It affects a lot of the species we think that are eaten by the spectacled flying fox, both the fruit and the pollen and flowers. There are 185 species in Australia that are naturally affected. I won't go into that. And out of the 120 or so known food plants of spectacled flying fox, 8 of them are actually already known to be affected. And part of the problem is that the Myrtaceae are often the dry season reserves. So they go away from the rainforests and go to the eucalypts and melaleucas to get their pollen and fruit. And that's their reserves during the poorer season. So it's already here. It's already affecting species. Melaleuca, Eucalyptus rhodamnia is one that's being affected quite badly, and Tristaniopsis, the water gum, is being seriously affected, and Rodvention feels that it might be under threat of extinction, which is a huge concern because it's one of the main species on all the creek lines. The myrtle rust is still spreading and affecting more species. There have been laboratory trials on a number of species which show that more species than are known to be naturally affected can be affected, so there's a big concern about that. And the problem here is that we don't know the full quantum of species eaten by spectacled flying fox, so or how they're used. So if the myrtle rust affects some of those species, how does that affect the spectacled flying fox? To me, it's of great concern, because if we don't know, we need to find out, because we might need to do something urgently about that. And about a quarter of the species known to be eaten by speckies are from the family Myrtaceae. Habitat destruction was identified in the recovery plan originally and in previous research work. And even before 2010, when it was still a vulnerable species, about a third of the breeding sites were actually destroyed by habitat destruction. In 2013 to 2020, when the I forget the name of the hotel, it was a Hyatt or something like that, was being constructed. They cleared 80% or more of the trees in the central business district. And so the image there shows that on the left, it's where the trees were originally. The little red crosses in the middle image show the ones that were wiped out, and that's what's left on the right. There's 5 trees left around the library, Cairns Library, that support flying foxes. And Cairns Council is still trying to move them on. Under licence, they're allowed to do it. The EPBC, the federal and the state government both approved that clearing, that moving on, that roost disturbance. But it comes back to the issue of where are the flying foxes? They're mostly not in broad closed forest or even in open forest. They're mostly outside the protected areas. So that means that anything like this that is occurring is going to affect the flying foxes. And the roosts are actually within urban matrix or in agricultural matrix. The average size of them is around 30 hectares, but the median's about 8. So they're fairly small and fairly isolated. And we think that we've reduced habitat destruction, but these are 2 graphs of the clearing rates on Cape York to the 4 left ones, and Wet Tropics, the 4 right ones. So it's 2018 to 2022. The clearing rate on Cape York has stayed about the same, around 2,500 hectares per annum. On the right, it's around 1,000, a bit more than 1,000 per hectares in that just 4-year period in the Wet Tropics. And that has been continuous ever since we had the Veg Management Act enacted all those years ago. And it's just continuing. There's no abatement. There's no reduction in this clearing rate. And that is affecting spectacled flying fox roosts, even in the rural areas. This is a map that I had from an older satellite image. There are 3 stages of clearing of this single roost, and this is happening elsewhere. Some of it was cleared in 95, 97, so that was before before the image was created. Then another lot was cleared in 2008-09, and then another lot was cleared in 2015-16. That was just before the spectacled flying fox became endangered or listed as endangered, which was in 2019. But this is still going on. So we're still facing this clearing problem of just habitat destruction, roost destruction, and that's a real concern because that's what they depend on. The other thing that was not identified in the recovery plan or any previous works was the invasive ants problem. Now, the invasive ants, the yellow crazy ant, which I saw to my chagrin in Christmas Island between 1999 and 2006, yellow crazy ants were all through there, and they've disturbed to an enormous extent the now critically endangered Christmas Island flying fox. They crawl up you and they're awful creatures. I mean, they're not vicious. They're just awful to us and other species. And electric ants. There's another species coming. I said in the paper that it was here, but it's actually not quite here. And red imported fire ants. This is a map straight from the ant study teams that show the ant distributions, which almost exactly correspond with the spectacled flying fox roost locations. If I'd overlaid them, there would have been not much difference. So these invasive ants, the yellow crazies and the electric ants, are both already probably affecting the roost, but there's no one I know who's actually studying that. There's just too few resources, too few people. So that's a serious potential effect. I'd like now to get on to the citizen scientists side of things. Citizen scientists are quite amazing people. When you start working with them, they're just so generous and so helpful. And those 2 pictures on the left, they're people gazing at flying foxes. That's part of it. But this is an image developed by Kate Coel for a report she gave to Mosman Shire Council, trying to help people understand how to count. And she did this, she's not a scientist, she did this just sort of generically, and she was able to sort of just say, well, that's what 10 animals looks like, that's what 100 animals looks like. So she was able to do that and showed a technique to do it, and it's basically what we scientists do anyways. We go out and we quantify them and say, okay, that's 10, that's 20, that's 100, that's 1,000, that sort of thing. It's pretty straightforward. And it's said that you've got to have a lot of training. And to a degree, it is true to get more precision, but you can do it as someone who may not be trained. You just think about it. That's the way it goes. And what the citizen science stuff has done is, this is an image of the roosts that were reported in the Westcott et al. Paper of 2018, which reported the decline. And they modelled their decline on 64 roosts, and within a year or two, there were about 76 roosts. I don't know whether that was due to the distribution disturbance of some of the roosts, but the point is that was the extent of the number of roosts that was known, about 76 at that time. Citizen scientists came along and produced another 100, more than 100 more roosts that are known to carry or support spectacled flying foxes in numbers. And we're talking about tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes more. So citizen science filled in some really serious gaps, particularly up in the north there, up in the Iron Range, McIlwraith Range area, but also more in the wet tropics than we ever anticipated that might be there. So that has been a hugely valuable contribution to the conservation and understanding of spectacled flying foxes. And we need that information because the work that was done by CSIRO has now been defunded. I was lying when I said the Bat Week is going to save everybody. It was defunded in 2022. 2023. And we're now in a situation where we don't have the resources or money to actually continue the sort of work that was done by some of those experts in CSIRO who are doing some brilliant work. And it's virtually stopped. They are tracked, putting collars on using GPS and P2T tags to work out where the animals are going in the dry season, because the roosts a lot of them dissipate during the dry season when they're not mating. They mate between about October through to about March, and that's when they're all congregated or aggregated around the main roosts. Then they distribute somewhere. We don't know where they go. And the tracking was starting to be done in 22, 23, and they managed to collar 6 and watch where they went. And they were using the ones that were collared at Ellerish and Faluga were using about 18 roosts. So those 6 animals were using about 18 roosts. So they do move around a lot. And they also discovered that the mangroves might be one of the places they go to during the dry season, which it could make sense, because it's really hard to survey mangroves because it's got big bitey things in there, and they're really hard to wander through. And same with Melaleuca forests. In fact, Emmeline, who's one of the ones I'll mention in a minute, did some surveys over the Daintree sites. There's Melaleuca sites there and there are mangrove sites, and she's been able to fly ones where we can only see the edges. So we might have an estimate, say that's 10% of the population. There might be 10,000 there because we can count 1,000. No means of checking whether that's accurate or not. So the use of drones and so on has been able to improve that. I'd like to talk about precision and accuracy just for a moment, because those who are not familiar with the difference is precision. You sort of collaborating with 2 or 3 observers to get a precision. How close is each observer to the other observer? And if you're precise, you might be close to an accurate estimate. But you need another means to work out the accuracy. Does that reflect the true population, or is it just a reflection of how we're seeing them? And in earlier years, when they used to do fly-out counts, you could take pictures and get an estimate to estimate your accuracy. I'll show you that in a graph, in an image. If you don't have a means of independently verifying that your precision is close to your estimate of population, then you're probably not on target. So if it's low accuracy due to low precision, then it's sort of all over the place. But you can even have high precision. Everybody agrees, yes, there's 3,400, but it might be off. There might be 5,000 there, for instance. So we need a measure to do that. This is where the technology can come in. And I'll go back to the citizen science in a minute, but the thermal imagery is now able to provide us with pretty good estimates of the actual numbers, because you can fly them, and in the right conditions you can actually get a good footprint of the camp. You can do counts, and we're developing that, and I'll get onto that in a minute too. Particularly useful for mangroves and melaleuca swamps, where you can't actually go in because of death-defying reasons. But one of the things that was pointed out in a study that was done in Southeast Australia is that the problem with thermal is, it might be that it may not work in the wet tropics because it's so warm. So we had to, and Emmeline's done a lot of this with Richard Hopkinson and myself, trying to get, and some others, trying to get some better understanding of how you can use thermal imagery from drones to detect accurately the actual animals, because you know, a hot leaf will look exactly the same as a warm animal in an image if it's too warm. And we've already learnt that as soon as the sun gets on the leaves, you get flare. So you can't distinguish flare from heat signature very easily. So we're doing some more of that. We need to do some more GPS tagging, of course, but again, that's something that we don't have the resources to do at the moment. So this is where the citizen science information can come in. We can use the citizen science records, and we've got a database now of 600 or so different records over a period of well, going back to the very original type locality. But these records are not collected systematically, and therefore there are a huge number of zeros. So it's zero inflated data. So it means that there's a real problem with working out if there's any trend. You just can't do it. And there's also the problem of survey effort. We don't know what the survey effort was. Birders can do a lot better because you can actually see the birds, and you've got experienced birders. But with this sort of citizen science information coming in, it's not really possible. So we can get sort of broad estimates of what the animals' sort of populations are in those roosts. And that's where we come in as scientists or competent professional observers, where we can go out and validate each of these locations. Because sometimes people get confused with spectacled flying fox or the black flying fox. Sometimes they can even be confused with the little red flying fox, because they're still a flying fox and they're biggish, but they're quite a bit smaller than the speckies. But we need to validate each one, so we can. When we've done that for every record that's come in so far. And at this stage, I don't really care about the accuracy of those numbers. We just need the sort of the broad quantum in the exponential category group, 50, 100, 500, 1,000, 10,000, that sort of thing, because that gives us information, an idea about how these animals are using the landscape throughout the year. And we're getting reports from throughout the year, new reports. Like there was a report from one of our friends from Koa, who said, "Oh, I think there's some spectacled flying foxes over the Koa River." And so we went out and had a look, and we've flown it, and certainly there's a big colony, or there was a big colony of 50,000 or something animals in Koa, along the Koa River. That's the first report we've ever had of anything in that region. So that came from citizen scientists. And so that was a really valuable observation. The nearest one was Kuranda, a small colony, and others at Mariba. So, a long way east and west. So that sort of information has become extremely useful. So the next problem is, well, how are we going to use this citizen science knowledge and data? And we're able to do that by going out and identifying roosts, making sure that they're spectacled flying fox roosts, or making sure that they're trained observers. You know, some of the wildlife guides, for instance, I would trust them because they do it every day. So they'll know the difference. And we get reports from some of those guides as well. So we use things like ImageJ to and RoboFlow to actually label what trained observers can identify as spectacled flying fox. So basically, you get thousands of images and you stitch them together through some magic process that I don't understand too well, but it's apparently it's automated now. And you put them all together and then you count them. So we do this work to try to get a good understanding of how many we're getting in each of these roosts. Slow work though, like it took 8 hours. Emily measured it, 8 hours to do 10,000 animals, and 10,000 animals is not a huge number. It's, you know, but it's a very slow process because you've got to label each one, and the new tools like ImageJ and RoboFlow are great because they actually count for you. So you just label each one and keep a tally. If you've ever tried to count an image of 10,000 dots, you can't do it unless you've got some means of controlling what you've already seen, because you go back and you repeat or miss. And going back to the accuracy thing, the National Flying Fox Monitoring Program recognised that for spectacled flying foxes and some others, there was no means of determining accuracy. I mentioned the fly-out counts used to be able to get images and get a pretty good accuracy estimate. So you could calibrate against your precision by observers. What the thermal images do is actually provide you that accuracy, so we can actually get a count. And it is remarkable when you're on the ground and you think, okay, there's 500 there. You put a drone up and you get a thermal image, and there's 1,000 from the image. It's always higher because we're missing stuff. Emily and I stood and counted the same roost, each in separate positions at COA, and we got a different estimate every time we went there. And the bats weren't flying out. So none flying in. So we got. It's really, really hard to count. And you think these are big animals, like they're that long and they're big and dark and they're hanging in trees and squawking and stuff. It's really a really hard thing to do. This is an image taken at Endeavour River West. This is one of the citizen science roosts that was reported to me. And in that image, there's probably 10, 15,000 animals. And that was not reported before. That was not reported in any of the National Flying Fox Monitoring Program data. So that's a really useful, another aspect of the really useful tool we have in citizen scientists. I'll just go show you an image of a roost at Yungaburra, which has been known for a long time. It's actually moved from another location to Peterson Creek. And in that image, there's a lot of spectacled flying foxes. They're really hard to see until you zoom in. You've got to actually zoom into, you do frame by frame by frame, but to count them. And so we're using ImageJ to do this, and this is what happens. There were 15,000 bats in that single location. Now, there's no way that we, as ground observers, can go out and count 15,000. Once you get above about 500 or 1,000, you just lose track. You start into group. You say, okay, there's 500 in that tree. There are probably 20 trees. That's 10,000 or something. So you just have to multiply and extrapolate from observable and reliable counts. But now we've got a means of testing the accuracy. So we can actually do it in the wet tropics. This is in the wet tropics. So we've worked out when you can fly. If it's heavy cloud, not a problem. If it's the ambient temperatures, above or below a certain temperature, you either go or don't go. So it really does work. The next stage of that is we're working with Tao Huang and Shizhu and Do Roy's from Science and Engineering. They're developing algorithms to do the automatic counting to save us from extreme headaches. And we have to do the labelling. They're also doing labelling, but Emmeline and some students and Shizhu and Dore's are all doing labelling as well, using those tools I've already shown, so that they can use those labeled images to train the algorithm, but you need a lot of images. You need hundreds of images to be able to train them. And about 80% of that goes in the training. This is a bat, this is not. This is the bat, this is not. And that's what the algorithm does, based on our, putting boxes around the hotspots that we know are spectacled flying foxes. Then about 10% of the images are used for validation, and about another 10% for field testing. So we go out and do it again. We're not there yet, but I pray that we do get there very quickly. This is an image of the RoboFlow annotation. So we do in individual images that are not stitched together. So we actually label the flying foxes in each of those images, and then they train the algorithm to actually read that each of those labeled images as flying foxes. Go on to what are the consequences of the decline in the numbers of spectacled flying foxes. And of course, it's heading towards extinction. That's a great concern. It's a loss of a species which we really shouldn't abide. But it also means, because this animal was such a great traveller, it's a really mobile species. It's going to, because it carries fruit and pollinates plants from coast and tablelands and all over the place, it's going to affect in the medium to long term the survival of species, of tree species. And that's of huge concern, because there's no greater traveller than the spectacled flying fox. In that there used to be probably in millions, some disagree with me, but the reports from many long-term observers on the tablelands say the skies were black for an hour or more, just before sunset. But even the loss from 300,000 or so to the 50 or so that they thought were left, that could cause huge problems. And if you're not getting fruits moving around and pollinating trees from different regions, then you're going to get some sort of bottleneck over time. So you need that constant movement of fruit and pollen around. And McCaney and co from CSIRO actually wrote a paper about this, saying that there's likely to be a major effect of loss of the seed dispersers by 2100. I think it's probably earlier than that. And about a 40% decline of seed dispersal distances by 2100. So that means the fruits are not being disturbed as much. There's a really good study of this in some of the Pacific Islands about the process of decline to a point where they're no longer good distributors, because flying foxes, like other animals, they come into a fruiting tree and they fight for fruit. So, that's my fruit, and they'll come along and try to take it from someone else. If they've got it in their mouths and someone comes along and attacks, and it's a bigger animal, a more aggressive animal, they'll fly away. They might fly, 50 meters or a kilometre or 2 kilometres with the fruit in their mouths. So they distribute the fruit. But when the density of the numbers drops, then they stop distributing. They just eat the fruit where they are, because the tree is full of fruit. There's more fruits than there are bats, so they're not competing for it. So that's a big concern as well. Now, I say that they're keystone species. I'm still not comfortable with what a keystone species means, like what the term means, because it's ill-defined in the literature as far as I can see. But they do move very long distances, and they do carry fruits. They certainly pollinate wide-ranging areas. They can carry seeds of things like Ficus septica and some of the other ficus in their guts for the day. So they can travel. They've been recorded as traveling over 100 kilometres each way from their roost. So they go from the roost out to some place to feed, and then they come back. 112 each way. That's 224 kilometres return flight from roost to roost, which is quite remarkable. They actually forage on about 8 different locations within about 25k each night. So they really do move around. There's nothing else like it. I mean, pigeons do a bit, but not in the same way as the flying foxes do. So the research needs, and some of this has come from Hoskins and so on in a report to the Queensland Department of Environment and Science, and some from the literature that I recently published. So there's some real urgent needs here. One is a model of extreme heat in past and future, because it's coming. There's no doubt about that. It's already here. Even Anthony Guterres yesterday said, we're already reached 1.5. Oh God, and there's no abatement. There's nothing turning around. We need to better understand, to help the species, we need to better understand how the flying foxes use the landscape. If we don't understand that, then what are we trying to manage to help their survival? We have to have a good understanding of that. We certainly need to map the invasive ants more effectively with the spectacled flying fox, because there's an overlap there which may well affect the breeding populations of the spectacled flying fox, because a lot of those roosts that I identified in that earlier image actually occur where the ants are. So that's a real problem, and I don't know the consequences of that. Apparently they don't actually kill the flying foxes, but they disturb them enough so the mothers have to pick up the babies and go somewhere else and find somewhere that doesn't have ants in it and where it's a suitable conditions. We don't actually know what suitable conditions of the roosts are. So that's why I said map and describe all the roosts. We need to know the condition, the threats, and what work needed. What structure do they like? What species do they like? Do they like open canopies? Do they like natives? Or they prefer exotic species? We know they use both. I don't know. Nobody's studied it, so we just have no idea what they actually need. And Susan and Alejandro are doing some work on thermal profiles of roosts, trying to figure out what a roost looks like, so we can do some predictive modelling over time. And we also don't know the heat tolerance of bats. There's been studies of grey-headed and black from down south, and one study done by a researcher down there who looked at Ratniaki, who looked at the heat tolerances of spectacled flying foxes from skins. So it wasn't actually live studies, so there was no real study of that. And there's very little study. There's none that I could discover about the physiology of the spectacled flying fox that looked at that aspect. We also need to know what food species are consumed, so that we can plan to say, okay, we need to help this species along because this species is going to disappear. So we need to work out that. We also need some stuff on more research on the diseases that affect bats and affect humans as well. I didn't mention that, but it's just one of the things that we certainly need work on. Things like toxoplasmosis and trypanosomiasis do cause problems, and there's other diseases that cause things like cleft palate syndrome, which is something we really don't understand, even though there's been work on it. And we need a really practical thing, like restart the monitoring. For God's sake, I mean, it was done from 2004 up until 2022 when it stopped after it was declared endangered, and it's sort of picked up partially by terrain, but it's by limited funding. I think it's 2 or 3 years funding. That's not enough. It's not a program. It's a hit and miss ad hoc pit stop. It's not going to help maintain it, because you need to have the monitoring over long term to even pick up a proper trend. So what I request of the audience, and if there's anyone online, I hope there are, send me information. It's pretty easy to do. Just get the location on your smartphone. They usually have a GPS embedded in the image, so you can give it a proper location. Approximate numbers, order of magnitude. That's all I want. Just so I got an idea: is it an individual bat, or is it a group of bats? There's a colony of bats. So send that information if you can. Get some photos if you can, so it can help us validate that what you're seeing is a spectacled flying fox and not a little red or a black or something else. And you can send it to me either through the JCU website, JCU email, or through my business email. Or you can use iNaturalist. iNaturalist is great. It actually records spectacled flying fox. There's a particular program there. And let me know, and I can pick some of those up. Put numbers in though. That's the important thing. And that's a link to the article I had published recently, which is the first systematic review in, I don't know, 20 years or something. So I hope that stimulates some more work on spectacled flying foxes. There's certainly helped NESP and federal government provide some funding, and I just hope that continues because it is in crisis. Thank you.
Really good. Thank you, Noel. Questions from anybody? And online questions? I wanted to ask, so is there data showing that these invasive ants are actually foraging right up to the top of the canopy? Or is there any data on that at all? Or
As far as I know, no.
Okay.
Not here. It exists on Christmas Island, where the Christmas Island flying fox was affected.
Right.
I don't think there were any killed, but they were greatly disturbed, particularly during breeding season when the young are at breast, and often left. They left overnight in creches, and the ants would just disturb them. The mothers would have to come back and pick them up.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, then to there. Okay, yeah.
Thanks, Noel. That was great. Okay, this is a bit of a bigger question because you like big questions, surely. So I think there's 660 vertebrate species in the region. I mean, how many do you think are in the same boat?
Oh, it's a difficult one. You're just talking about terrestrial, not marine?
Just vertebrate, yeah, vertebrate species. Apparently there's 669 in the Wet Tropics.
Yeah, well, we know
region.
that from work by Steve Williams and Alejandro, that possums are affected already, and you and Bill did work on that as well. So we know that they're affected by heat, and the temperatures are getting too warm for things like green possums and lemuroids. I suspect that given the condition of given the temperature increases, that other mammals are going to be affected as well. And I think that's part of the reason we saw the demise of some major areas of previously populated northern quoll, for instance, because we're getting to the limit of their thermal tolerance, and we're also seeing the change in seasonality. So the dry seasons are getting longer, and the wet seasons, which is when the food's around and they breed, is getting shorter, or it's getting wetter in some ways. So I think many mammal species are being affected. I suspect some of the birds are being affected, but there's not enough studies to be able to quantify that. Maybe frogs, maybe the water's getting too warm. And it could even extend it to invertebrates, because invertebrates are still susceptible to heat extremes. So I don't know, and there's not enough work going on to understand that.
The iceberg.
It could be an indicated species. Yeah, it could well be a warning. You've got to pay attention to this. It's serious. It's no longer a trivial matter.
When I gather we're talking mainly about spectacled flying foxes. So some of those big roosts you've got picked up with the infrared and stuff, could there be other clusters of species in there, like say rainbow lorikeets or ibis or something?
We haven't seen anything like that. We occasionally get a rufous owl sitting just next to the camp waiting for dinner.
Yeah.
But usually the spectacled flying foxes don't roost with anything else. And there's soft-crested cockatoos. For instance, the tolga, we have to guard against the drone getting hammered by cockatoos, but they don't roost together. And the other species of flying fox, particularly the little red, push the spectacled flying fox out. So if a mob of, and I mean a mob, they're it's like a gang come in, the little reds come in. They might be in there hundreds of thousands, and they just mob the spectacled flying foxes, and the speckies just go. They just go. They might move to another part of the same roost. They might just go to some other place. So they don't actually. You couldn't mistake an ibis or something for a spectacled flying fox because they're not together.
Yeah, and another one you mentioned that I think what you said was for some reason, some areas the bats didn't seem to suffer from the same heat stresses in other areas.
Yeah,
And I was wondering, would that be like some kind of different gene pool or something?
No, there's a fair exchange between the roosts. So there seems to be no there's not a coastal population and a tablelands population. There seems to be a bit of interchange, but it's not well studied. I must admit that. But in earlier studies, like over the last 25 years, I suppose, it's been shown that they do move around a lot. Less so between the wet tropics major population and the Cape York one, and much less with New Guinea. We don't even know whether there's still interchange there. So there might be some speciation occurring. We don't know.
And I'll quickly sneak one more question in. The small colony at Machen's Beach, which might only be 30, 40 bats, but I can't, because they tend to take off late, I can't tell what they are. But would the fact they're in the mangroves be a defining feature?
Yeah, no. The other bats will use mangroves as well.
Yeah,
and they'll use creekline vegetation and Melaleucas paperbucks.
Yeah.
No, so it won't be a defining feature. But I know
thanks a lot.
The ones at Machen's Beach are actually spectacled flying foxes if it's the same animals.
Did you guys have a question? No. Oh. Yeah. Just one sec. Just.
Thanks, Noel. Really good talk. Much appreciated. I was just wondering if you can recap from the point of view of restoring ecosystems, habitat for spectacled flying foxes. What's the highest priority for information in that perspective? You sort of covered it. I was going to ask you what information there is about their preferences for roosts, but you sort of said there's very little. So what's the highest priority in terms of the attempts to increase the amount of restoration going on?
Look, I think the most urgent thing is to understand the heat, the dramatic heat increase, the temperature increase in the region. We need to understand that. We know that it's happening, but we need to get a better means of modelling how it's going to affect, using past information to predict the future as much as we can. There's no guarantee, of course, but we need to understand that, because that is singularly, to my mind, the major threat. It will only take one or two major events like an extra, the sort of temperature we saw in 2018 and 19 over a broader region, not just in some patches like Gordonvale. If that extended over a greater region, then the bats will be in serious trouble. Like it could wipe out very large colonies, because they breed at the same time as these temperature events are coming in. So that kills not only the mothers, who are under stress, but the babies as well. So your repopulation is just gone, maybe for a whole year, a whole generation. So that's, to me, the major issue. So we need that. First is the model of the anticipated temperatures, temperature profile, whatever we want to call it, and a better understanding of roosts and the way they use roosts and why they use roosts in the way they do, because that, to me, is the key to how can we help these animals survive the big heat events that are coming. Maybe we concentrate all our work on Cape York stuff, roosts and the tablelands and Port Douglas roosts, for instance. I don't know, but we need that heat model first, and the roost characteristics that are really important for speckies.
Noel, thanks for a comprehensive talk, somewhat depressing. It's clear that you want to do something with this information to save this species and others. And I mean, you've also painted, excuse my throat, you've also painted a picture of wider implications through pollination, etc. And Sue, of course, has raised other vertebrate species that could be in a similar position, I guess, through thermal stress. Has anybody tried, should you take a doomsday approach to this whole business by I guess it would have to be through modeling of what would this place look like if thermal stress continues, as you imply it will, if clearing continues and habitat destruction increases, which I suspect it will, plus other stresses, ants, blah, blah, blah. What does this place look like in 100 years' time? And would that actually motivate action? Or would they, like the IPA today, apparently yesterday, said there's no such thing as heat death for humans, that is, here, convince a few old people in Paris of that. But anyway, I mean, would that approach work, or does that just feed into the alarmist, the anti-alarmist rhetoric of some parts of our society?
Oh, that's such a complex question. I mean, you know, we managed to get rid of the ozone damaging chemicals very quickly. Well, not quite, but it was a much more effective thing than the climate change alarm. That just seemed to be I think people saw it as an impossible task because it was sort of rolled out slowly, and we've got to reduce this, we've got to reduce that, and you know, don't drive so far and that sort of stuff. And it just didn't have any meaning, whereas the ozone layer had real meaning immediately. I'm not sure that forecasting would work. I don't know anyone who could actually project that far forward using, you know, unless you use really sophisticated modelling tools, and you probably could. But I don't know. Would it work? Would it raise the hackles of people and say, "Oh shit, we've got to do something about this now"? Yeah,
That's my question.
yeah, I know, but I don't know the answers to that, Bob, because we try every way we can. You know, scientific articles and put out popular articles and get them, get it in Facebook and all that sort of stuff. Just doesn't seem to work. I think there's people have too many other priorities like cost of living and all that sort of stuff. It's just one of those things that somebody else will look after, and it even goes down to the protections of species like the endangered spectacled flying fox. One would assume as a citizen that once it's been identified as endangered, the government's going to do something about it, because that's their responsibility, that's their duty, that's their charge. That's what they should be doing. So we all sit back and say, oh, well, the government's made it endangered, and therefore they must be doing something about it. And unless you're right in the thick of things and understand all the issues, you won't even know that they're not doing anything. And that's the history. We've known for 30 years that this species is in decline, and now serious decline. What's been done? They cut the funding. Like, seriously? It's an endangered species. They declared it endangered in 2019. It's now 2025. It's 6 years and the funding has gone. We're still fighting for every cent, every bit of resource to be able to do what needs to be done. And this paper is, it's out there. It's open access, and so many other papers like it say the same sorts of things. We're in crisis, and it's still not paid. They're not paying attention. It's not getting into policy or practice or action. So it's just, it can be despairing. I try not to.
Oh, okay, 2 more questions. We'll finish up with these 2.
Thank you for that. That was a very nice presentation. I've had a little bit to do with bats, and I've been close enough to the flying foxes to really appreciate them as part of our fauna. But with bats in general, and perhaps with flying foxes in particular, I wonder whether the general public fear of bats is anything to do with a worldwide fear of rabies. And I wonder what your comment would be on that, on rabies, and and on the likelihood of bats being hammered specifically if rabies ever reached the Australian shores.
Yeah, rabies. It's very hard to contract rabies from bats unless you're handling them. So you don't get it from water supply, or even if it falls on your head, you wouldn't stand under a bat colony anyway. But you're not going to get it that way. It's from scratches and bites. And all people like me who handle bats are all vaccinated against the lyssavirus. So we're all vaccinated against rabies. It's the same group. And rabies is not in Australia, but lyssavirus is. And lyssavirus has a very similar symptoms, and it can kill you. So, but it's not a real issue for the vast majority of people, because they're not going to be handling bats. I mean, you get the occasional kid picking a bat up, and because it's fallen off its mum and it's under a tree and it's squawking, and someone comes along and picks it up. All the bat people say, just don't do that. Give us a call. The fear of flying foxes is long and deep. And I wrote a paper a couple of years ago about this very thing, about, it's the fear is one of the things that is not helping, because, politicians don't see it as a priority because, my neighbours said that the bats are a massive problem and they're going to pollute the water and cause diseases, and even things like Hendra. They say, well, you're all going to get Hendra. Well, no, you can't get Hendra from a bat. You get it from a horse that has been affected by a bat. So those sorts of myths, and I wrote a paper on that as well. So in answer to Bob, who's just gone, Bob's question, you can put information out there, but unless it's listened to and acted upon, then it's pretty useless.
This may be a question I should be asking the bats, but I noticed that when it's really hot weather, the bats seem to be hanging in the sun, flapping like crazy. I don't know if they're trying to cool themselves down or what, but they don't seem to move over into the shade. Or is that just my observation? Like maybe that's just some of them do that. But
yeah, they do have a fanning activity to keep them cool, and they pant a lot. So they're like dogs. So they do try to cool. In some places, and this is one of the problems about not knowing what the elements of a roost are, right for flying fox. In some places, they actually move within the roost to a more shadier area, or in your case, it might be because there's a bit of a breeze flowing through. And it might be in the sun, but you're getting evaporation, so you're cooling down. So I don't know the answer to that, but they do have different methods. But if the whole of the ambient temperature is above the threshold, the lethal threshold, they're just going to die.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, eh?
Nice
Great
chat.
talk.
Oh, yeah. No, thanks. Really interesting talk. Lots of good conversation. Very informative. So thank you very much, folks. And let's all thank Noel. Very much appreciated.